statute that relates to obstructing a proceeding that's not yet in being, that is, some future proceeding, is 1512. And my view was of the particular provision, 1512C, was that it requires, what it covers is obstruction by means of impairing evidence, that you know some evidence is going to be needed in a future proceeding, and you impair it either by making it not available or by corrupting it in some way, altering it, destroying it. That's what I thought the scope of that statute dealt with. And to my knowledge, the only cases ever brought under it involved the destruction of evidence. Based on public reports, which may be completely wrong, I thought that that the special counsel may be trying to interpret the statute to say that any act, not destruction of evidence or anything, but any act that influences a proceeding is a crime if it's done with a bad intent. My concern there is that unlike something like bribery statute or document destruction where you prohibit it, that's a bad act. You don't need to be performing that bad act if you're a government official. But if you say that any act that influences a proceeding is a crime if you have a bad state of mind, that's what the people at Justice Department do every day of the week, is influence proceedings. That's what they're there for. And what I was worried about is the impact on the department and other agencies if you say to someone, if you, in supervising a case or handling a case, make a decision for a bad intent, it can be a crime. And I thought that that would essentially paralyze the government. So just to give an example, you know, Eric Holder made some pardon recommendations during the Clinton administration, which were controversial. Incidentally, I supported Eric Holder for his position. But could someone come along then later and say, well, if you did that for a political reason to help Hillary Clinton run in New York, that's a crime? And when he's exercising his prerogatives, you know, in that situation, and you can just see how that could paralyze government. And that was my concern.
You also referred to your concerns with the prosecution of Senator Menendez. Did that weave into that same thought process?
Yes, because in that case, my concern was that they were basically taking activities that were not, you know, wrongful acts in themselves. You know, the political contributions were lawful political contributions, and the things with you know, the travel on his friend, that was his friend for 25 years. They were taking a trip together, and you take those kinds of things and then you couple it with official action, and then the prosecutor comes along and says, well, we're going to look into your mind and see what your subjective intent was for performing these two sets of lawful acts, and we're going to say, you know, that you're corrupt. Good. So I just think that gives too much power to the prosecutor, and I think if that kind of and by the way, you know, they've had cases like this for, you know, I mean, they've been pursuing things like this, and they've had to be slapped down a few times by the Supreme Court on these kinds of aggressive things involving, you know, quid pro quos on the Hill. So
let me, if I can, thank you. I just thought it was helpful because I think you tried to explain a lot of that and you were cut off, so I thought I'd use some of my time in the first round to ask you that. Also, I think somebody tried to characterize you as having somehow been opposed to any sort of Russia probe or Russia investigations. Have you ever gone on record as opposing any of the things that we're trying to do to figure out where Russia may have been involved in election tampering?
No, and in fact, in the op-ed piece where I said I thought the president was right in firing Comey, I said that the investigation was going forward under the supervision of Rod Rosenstein.
Yeah. Did you also say more than one time that you felt like the special counsel investigation should reach a conclusion, that that special counsel Mueller shouldn't be that he should be allowed to draw this to a conclusion, then he will submit his report, and you're going to do everything that you can to present as much of that information as you can, to the extent that confidential information is not being compromised?
To the extent the regulations permit it, yeah.
Did you also say that there's even a scenario where you can't imagine a scenario for cause, but even a scenario for cause where you'd have to take under serious consideration before you remove special counsel?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
There hasn't been a special counsel removed since Archibald Cox, and that didn't work out.
Didn't work out too well, right? And again, did you also say that in those circumstances, have you had a discussion with the president with respect to? I think you said you had a discussion about you had a relationship with Mr. Mueller, but no discussion about the special counsel investigation and your opinions on it with respect to any discussions you've had with the president.
Right. That was the first meeting I had with the president, and then in November I met with him about the Attorney General job, and there was no discussion of the substance of the investigation. The president didn't ask me my views about any aspect of the investigation, and he didn't ask me about what I would do about anything in the investigation.
With respect to the line of questioning about the states that have legalized marijuana, either for medicinal purposes or recreational purposes, I think what you were trying to say in a very, very respectful way is it's not your job to do our job. Is that right? That if we ultimately want to provide certainty for these businesses. You've done a good job in saying that you disagree with the policy of the states, but we are where we are, and you would not want to undermine that given that investments have been made, states have moved forward. But at the end of the day, we should stop talking about it here and making it your job. And those members, I don't happen to be one of them, who think that we should take these federal laws off the books should probably file a bill and try and get it done. Is that a fair assessment of your opinion?
That's generally fair, yes.
Okay. Just a few minor things so that we can get to the next round. There was a report by the Inspector General in 2014 that had to do with accountability in the Department of Justice. I don't expect you to be familiar with this report, but there were some very interesting observations there about a lack of follow-through on disciplinary action for a number of I think the subtitle of the report was the DOJ could strengthen procedures for disciplining attorneys. It's something I would commend to you and maybe dust off and see if there have been any actions since this report. I didn't get a satisfactory answer when it was contemporary with a nominee from the Obama administration for the position you're seeking, which is one of the reasons why I opposed the nomination.
Actually, I think very highly of Inspector General Horowitz, and I haven't seen that report, but that issue is one that I plan to take up with him.
And then just so that I do finish on time versus pretend I'm going to and go 2 minutes early over. One, I want to get your recommendation on intellectual property. I think we have more work to do to give the Department of Justice tools to go after bad actors, which are China, Russia, India, a number of other countries, Brazil, that are stealing our intellectual property. Also want to talk about what I think is the exploitation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, particularly around website access. The web didn't exist, and now we have attorneys filing a number of frivolous lawsuits. Would like to get some feedback on that after you get confirmed. And finally, I want to make sure that you recognize in the First Step Act that faith-based organizations that have proven to help reduce recidivism are absolutely in play for the First Step Act, and hopefully we can make sure the Department of Justice move forward with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
I believe that's the end of the first round. Mr. Barr, you're able to go for a little bit longer?
Sure.
Okay. So we'll do 5 minutes. As you can tell, I've been pretty liberal with the time, but let's try to honor it the best we can. Senator Gressman.
Okay. Where he left off on working with faith-based institutions, you were very positive about that?
Yeah, absolutely, Senator.
That takes care of my first question. Enforcement of the antitrust laws is extremely important to ensure that markets are fair and participants don't engage in abusive activity harming consumers. I've been particularly active in making sure that the Justice Department and Federal Trade Commission carefully scrutinize mergers, as well as looking out for anti-competitive behaviors and predatory practices in certain sectors of the economy, and particularly in my state of Iowa, the agricultural industry, but I'm also pursuing things in health care. In particular is because I will be chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, I'm interested in making sure that companies in drug and healthcare industries are playing by the rules. Everyone's concerned about the high cost of healthcare and especially the skyrocketing price of prescription drugs. Do you agree that the Justice Department has a very important role in this area?
Yes, Senator.
And would you commit to making antitrust enforcement a priority?
Yes, it has to be a priority.
Okay, thank you. Now to a favorite issue of mine, whistleblower protection. Whistleblowers, as I told you in my office, are very critical to exposing waste, fraud, and abuse. There are eyes and ears on the ground. Their courage, when they have it, and most of them do have great courage, or they wouldn't come forward to expose government malfeasance. That's how important they are. So I hope I can have you have a favorable view towards the opportunity to listen to whistleblowers, protect them from retaliation, and promote a culture that values important contribution from those patriotic people.
Absolutely, Senator.
Okay. Now to the Foreign Agents Registration Act. I hope you understand there have been very few prosecutions under the Foreign Agents Registration Act since 1938. And so that lax enforcement, I think, is getting, obviously, even since the Mueller investigation, getting a lot more attention now. But we had a hearing on it before the committee, and I think it proves that we should see more transparency and more enforcement against bad actors, not less. Do you agree that the Foreign Agents Registration Act is a critical national security and public accountability tool? And if confirmed, will you commit to make sure that that act is a top priority?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. So then getting back to legislation that I think will improve that 1938 Act, I introduced the Disclosing Foreign Influence Act to improve transparency, accountability, and enforcement. You haven't probably read that act, but I'd like to work with you, even though it's not in this committee, it's in Foreign Relations Committee. I'd like to have you work with us so it's something that we can pass and make sure that this law is more useful than it has been over the last 80 years. I support the Freedom of Information Act and the public disclosure of government records. Transparency yields accountability. You hear me say that all the time, and that's true no matter who's in the White House. When I was chairman of the committee, I helped steer FOIA Improvement Act into law, which creates a presumption of openness, and that presumption of openness is a very important standard. The Justice Department oversees the federal government's compliance with FOIA. So I hope you would agree that FOIA is an important tool for holding government accountable. And if confirmed, then would you make sure it's a top priority to make FOIA and the faithful and timely implementation of the 2016 amendments a top priority?
Yes, we'll work hard on that.
Because you know what really happens in the bowels of the bureaucracy? It just takes them forever because maybe something's going to embarrass them, so they don't want it out in the public. So you get all sorts of excuses. We got to do away with those excuses. One way to make FOIA work better is by reducing the number of requests. This will have to be my last question. One way to make FOIA work better is by reducing the number of requests that have to be made in the first place. That's why I'm a strong advocate for improved proactive disclosure. If confirmed, will you commit to help advocate for more proactive disclosure of government records? Now, that's not just by the Justice Department, but because your government or your department's top dog in this particular area in the federal government overall.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Feinstein.
Mr. Barr, I see you have staying power, and I see it runs in the family, and particularly your grandson. I'd like to send a little care package down to him. He deserves a medal.
We'll get that to her. There you go.
Thank you, Senator.
You're welcome.
He doesn't have to share it with the rest of the family.
In 1994, you said that gun control is a dead end. It won't reduce the level of violent crime in our society. The year you made this comment, I introduced a federal assault weapons ban, and the president signed it into law. A 2016 study shows that compared with the 10-year period before the ban was enacted, the number of gun massacres between 94 and 04 fell by 37%, and the number of people dying from gun massacres fell by 43%. In addition, between 2004 and 2014, there has been a 183% increase in massacres and a 239% increase in massacre deaths. Do you still believe that prudent controls on weapons won't reduce violent crime? And if so, what is your basis for this conclusion?
I think that the problem of our time is to get an effective system in place that can keep dangerous firearms out of the hands of mentally ill people. That should be priority number one, and it's going to take some hard work, and we need to get on top of the problem. We need to come up with agreed-to standards that are prohibitors of people who are mentally ill. We have to put the resources in to get the system built up the way we did many years ago on the felon records and so forth. We have to get the system working, and as I say, it's sort of piecemeal a little bit right now. We need to really get some energy behind it and get it done. And I also think we need to push along the ERPOs so that we have these red flag laws to supplement the use of the background check to find out if someone has some mental disturbance. This is the single most important thing I think we can do in the gun control area to stop these massacres from happening in the first place.
Well, thank you. I'd like to work with you in that regard. Yes. In August of 2002, the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel issued opinions authorizing enhanced interrogation methods that included waterboarding and extended sleep deprivation. These opinions were later withdrawn, and the Justice Department's Office of Professional Responsibility found that they reflected a lack of, this is a quote, a lack of thoroughness, objectivity, and candor, end quote. In 2015, I worked with Senator McCain to pass legislation making clear that enhanced interrogation techniques are unlawful and limiting authorized interrogation techniques to those listed in the Army Field Manual. And that is the law today. If confirmed, will you ensure that the Justice Department upholds the law?
Yes, Senator. I think that was an important change because I think it gave clarity to the law, and I will support that.
Thank you. I'm delighted to hear that. And now, a lot of us have asked about the Mueller report and whether you would commit to providing it to Congress. When asked, I thought you said yes, but when I tried to clarify it, I meant the full report, including obstruction of justice. You again said yes. Then when Senator Blumenthal asked you about the Mueller report, you seemed to make a distinction and said you were going to provide your own report based on Mueller's report, but not the report, this is the way we understood it, but not the report he submits at the end of the investigation. This is concerning, as there is nothing in the regulations that prevent you from providing Mueller's report to Congress. While the regs refer to a confidential report to be provided to the Attorney General, the regs do not state that confidentiality means the report cannot be provided to Congress. So here's the question. Will you provide Mueller's Mueller's report to Congress, not your rewrite or a summary?
Well, the regs do say that Mueller is supposed to do a summary report of his prosecutive and his declination decisions, and that they will be handled as a confidential document as are internal documents relating to any federal criminal investigation. Now, I'm not sure, and then the AG has some flexibility and discretion in terms of the AG's report. What I am saying is my objective and goal is to get as much as I can of the information to Congress and the public. And, you know, these are departmental regulations, and I'm going to be talking to Rod Rosenstein and Bob Mueller. I'm sure they've had discussions about this. There's probably existing thinking in the department as to how to handle this. But all I can say at this stage, because I have no clue as to what's being planned, is that I am going to try to get the information out there consistent with these regulations. And to the extent I have discretion, I will exercise that discretion to do that.
Well, I can only speak for this side, and maybe not all this side, but we really appreciate that. And the degree to which you can get us a prompt report in the fullest possible form would be really appreciated. And I think there has to be a realization, too, among the administration that this is an issue of real concern to people and to the Congress, and we should be able to see the informed information that comes out. So
I understand.
I'm very hopeful.
Thank you.
Let me ask this question on enhanced. Did my time run out?
Yeah, go ahead.
On enhanced interrogation. During a 2005 panel discussion, you said the following, I think, about interrogating suspected terrorists, and I quote, "Under the laws of war, absent a treaty, there's nothing wrong with coercive interrogation, applying pain, discomfort, and other things to make people talk, so long as it doesn't cross the line and involve the gratuitous barbarity involved in torture," end quote. This is a panel discussion, Civil Liberties and Security, July 18th, 2005. Do you believe that torture is ever lawful?
No.
Is waterboarding torture?
You know, I'd have to look at the legal definition. You're talking about under the, right now, it's prohibited. So, you know, the law has definitively dealt with that. I can't even remember what the old law was that defined torture. I'd have to look at that and then, you know, figure out what's involved in it. But sorry.
Keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's okay, sir. Sorry.
At what point does interrogation cross the line to the gratuitous barbarity involved in torture? That's your quote.
Well, I wasn't using that as a legal, the gratuitous barbarity. That's what I was. I was saying torture is gratuitous barbarity. So I wasn't saying that gratuitous.
Oh, well, that's helpful then. That's helpful.
Yeah.
And you define waterboarding. You know, one would think these questions would never be necessary. I thought that all my life, and then I found I was wrong, and they really are. Mm-hmm. And I was chairman of intelligence when we did the big torture report, and what I found and what I saw was really indicative of reform. So I think for the Attorney General, knowing the position is really very important.
Right.
So maybe you could concisely state your position on torture.
I don't think we should ever use torture. And I think that the clarification that was it your legislation of the putting in the Army
McCain's
the field manual?
That's right.
Was important to clarifying where the line is.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cornett.
Mr. Barr, I want to talk about guns, and I want to talk about China in the 5 minutes we have together. Back in 1992, there was some discussion about your position on Congress's role when it comes to banning certain types of semi-automatic weapons. Sometimes people call those assault weapons.
Shepard Smith in New York. Our reporting begins with the man who could become the new boss of the Russia investigation. President Trump's Attorney General nominee, William Barr, promising under oath that he will allow the special counsel Robert Mueller to complete his job. And we'll get to all of that. But first, I want to go to Catherine Herridge in Washington for a recap of what's happened this afternoon and the important matters at hand. Hello, Catherine.
Well, Shep, I think one of the most interesting things we've learned through the course of the confirmation hearings is we've gotten more detail on kind of the steps it will take for Robert Mueller's final report to be in the public domain so that folks at home can read it. There's been a lot of speculation as to what the rules and regulations are, but what we've heard from the nominee for Attorney General William Barr is a very specific set of steps. He said that he expects to receive a summary from Robert Mueller. It will contain a list of cases that are being prosecuted and also what he calls declinations. Declinations are cases where they've gathered evidence, but they don't feel there's enough to prosecute. And then he's indicated that it will be up to him to decide how to take that information and relay it to Congress and then also to make it public. He's testified that his intent at this point is to make that information public to the full extent of the law and based on these regulations, Shep.
Catherine Herridge, live in Washington. Catherine, thank you. We're scrambling with breaking news of an order in the world that we really haven't seen. This is a look at Great Britain's Parliament, where we now have the results of a vote which could ripple across the pond and around the world. British lawmakers voted against the Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal in what British officials say was the largest defeat in the House of Commons in modern history.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes, order. The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432. So the noes have it. The noes have it.
The vote was worse than anyone anticipated. So what comes next is very much up in the air. The Prime Minister's proposal laid out the terms of Britain's split with the European Union, sort of the rules of separation. That separation is scheduled to happen on the 29th of March, more than 2.5 years after voters in the United Kingdom decided to cut ties. The question is, how exactly? This stuff's confusing. It's confusing even for them. And for us in the United States, even more so with all their arcane rules and laws that we really don't understand. But here's a stab at it. The immediate next step would be for the Prime Minister, Theresa May, to come back to the Parliament with a revised deal, a sort of Plan B. The calendar is specific. That must happen by Monday of next week. Lawmakers would vote again on the new Plan B, and they could vote over and over again, presumably. And if there is a Plan B, we don't know what that Plan B is, and we certainly don't know how it might be received, since we don't know what it is, and neither does anyone else. So if March the 29th rolls around and lawmakers still have not approved their plans for Britain's exit from the European Union, we have what analysts call a no-deal Brexit, or a hard Brexit. Kind of like a divorce with really no agreement for what to do about anything. Like the kids and the property and the cash and the belongings. It's just nothing. In this case, there would be no rules for imports or for exports. Like, how do you get prescriptions and produce across the border? What are the rules? And what about trade of all kinds? What about Britons living or working elsewhere in Europe? It would, without argument, trigger economic chaos. The financial analysts at Standard & Poor's predict 1 million Britons would lose their jobs, 1 million of them. A bloodbath that could have global implications. Here in the United States, that could affect everything from stock markets to trade to travel, even what we pay for a lot of products. Now, another option for Britain would be to hold another nationwide vote or referendum to see if Britons really want to rethink this whole Brexit thing. The results of the original referendum were very close, 52 to 48%, and that result came as a major surprise to the analysts. They could also turn the whole thing over to Parliament to figure it out for themselves. Theresa May asked today of Parliament, what do you want then? Maybe a Brexit delay if the EU would permit, and British leaders could agree. There's no consensus, obviously. That said, today's defeat was a landslide. Theresa May got a shellacking. The right voted no. The left voted no. It was the worst failure of government in Britain by the numbers in the history of Great Britain. The papers in London right now calling it humiliating. And right after it happened, Jeremy Corbyn of the opposition called for a no confidence vote. That comes tomorrow. Though she recently survived one, everything may have just changed. Theresa May is barely hanging on to power. The United Kingdom is on the edge of chaos, economically, politically, and socially, and the whole world waits. Greg Palcott live tonight in London. Greg, exactly what happens tomorrow?
Amazing stuff, Shep. There is shock in the capital of the UK. No one expected this. As you laid out, UK Prime Minister Theresa May getting a firm rebuke from the House of Commons on both sides of the aisle, both her own Tory MPs as well as the Labour representatives. And you ask what happens next. I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about that. But specifically, we know that tomorrow, Theresa May will be in the dock. She will be, her administration will be facing a vote of no confidence led by the Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn. We'll be asking serious questions about how she handled this whole thing. Remember, it was 2.5 years. It was June 2016 when this referendum was taken, and the British people voted narrowly, but voted in favor of leaving the European Union. They have had 2.5 years, 2 years of very hard negotiations between May and Brussels. They came up with this deal. Absolutely, May has said this is the best. This is the best we have to offer, and she got thumped, including 118 members of her own party. So again, she will be facing a vote of no confidence tomorrow. You can count on, according to everybody that's been speaking before the cameras, that the Labour